My name is Connor, and I work at a bank. I have a 10-year-old son and live a peaceful life with my wife and kids in our cozy home. But what I'm about to share with you still haunts me to this day. For 2 nights after this incident, I couldn't sleep properly. And even now, the thought of it sends chills down my spine. At my workplace, I had a close friend named Anthony. We met at the bank, and over time, our friendship grew strong. We would share lunches, have coffee breaks together, and hang out even after work. Years passed, and Anthony became more than just a colleague. He was like family. We often had dinners together, attended parties, and celebrated milestones side by side. I have a strict morning routine. I always go for a walk before heading to work, no matter how late I sleep. One morning, as usual, I went to the park near my home. It was quiet, the kind of stillness only early mornings bring. After completing a couple of laps around the track, I noticed someone sitting on a bench. It was Anthony. I was surprised to see him there, considering his home was about 6 miles away. Why would he be at my neighborhood park this early in the morning? Confused but glad to see him, I walked over and greeted him. "Anthony, what are you doing here at this hour? Everything okay?" I asked, but something about him felt off. Anthony and I had always been warm and cheerful whenever we met, but today his face looked pale, his eyes distant. It was as if he was carrying a weight I couldn't see. He barely smiled, and his energy felt heavy. Sitting next to him, I asked again, "What's wrong, man? You look upset?" He hesitated for a moment, then sighed deeply. "It's my daughter," he said. "She's sick. I've been so worried about her." I felt a pang of concern for him. "If she's unwell, take her to a doctor. What's the problem?" I asked. But Anthony's response made my heart sink. "Dear Connor, if anything happens to me, promise me you'll take care of my daughter. Make sure she's okay. Promise me, please." I was stunned. "What are you talking about? Why would something happen to you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, tears welled up in his eyes and his voice cracked as he repeated, "Promise me, Connor. Promise you'll look after her if I'm gone." I didn't know how to respond. Seeing my best friend like this, so vulnerable and broken, was unsettling. I finally said, "Of course, Anthony, you have my word. I'll take care of her, like my own child. But stop talking like this. Nothing's going to happen to you." He seemed to calm down a bit, though his face still carried an unshakable sadness. After a while, he stood up, shook my hand, and said, "Thank you, Connor. I'll see you soon." Then he walked away, disappearing into the quiet streets. I stood there for a while, processing everything. Why was Anthony acting so strange? Why would he come all the way to my park so early in the morning instead of just calling me? Something about it didn't sit right. I eventually headed back home, still lost in thought. When I reached my house, my wife opened the door. Her face looked tense. "Connor, did you hear?" she asked. "Hear what?" I replied, confused. She hesitated, then said, "Anthony. He passed away last night, around 2 a.m. Her words hit me like a brick. "What?" I stammered. For a moment, my mind went blank. My wife kept talking, but I couldn't hear her. All I could think about was the conversation I just had. Anthony had been with me in the park this morning. I'd spoken to him, touched his hand. He was there. But how could that be? He can't be dead. I finally said I just saw him. He was at the park. We talked. My voice trailed off. The room started spinning, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the couch. My wife was sitting beside me, holding my hand. "You fainted," she said. "I was so worried." I sat up slowly and tried to explain. "I didn't faint because of the news," I said. "I fainted because I saw him. I talked to Anthony this morning. He asked me to take care of his daughter. It was him. I'm sure of it." My wife stared at me, her face pale. She didn't say a word, but I could tell she didn't believe me. To this day, I don't know how to make sense of what happened. Was it really Anthony I saw that morning? Was it his spirit? Or was it just my imagination? All I know is I'll never forget that encounter. And every time I think about it, I get chills. I was a medical student, fresh out of training, eager to start my career. When I landed my first job, I thought it would be exciting, but I didn't realize what I was getting into. My position was in a hospital, but not in the usual departments. I was assigned to the morgue. Yes, the morgue. I was hired as an assistant, and my responsibilities included photographing bodies, taking fingerprints, and preparing reports. I also had to store the bodies in their designated chambers after documenting everything. My supervisor, Dr. John, showed me the ropes. The morgue was divided into two sections, one for storing bodies and other for performing autopsies. It was my first day, and as I stood in the autopsy room, surrounded by lifeless bodies, a chill ran down my spine, and the air felt thick, almost oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't belong there, but I pushed through. After a week on the job, I started getting used to the routine. The fear gradually faded, or so I thought. One day, when I arrived at work, I found a police officer waiting with a new body. Dr. John wasn't in yet, so it was up to me to handle the situation alone. The body was lying on a stretcher in the autopsy room. As I lifted the sheet, I saw it was a young woman. Her eyes and mouth were wide open, as if frozen in a scream. The sight was unsettling. To say the least, I forced myself to focus on my task. But suddenly, I heard the sound of a door creaking open behind me. I spun around, my heart racing. It was just the janitor. He told me there was a call for me at the reception desk. Relieved, I covered the body and hurried to answer the phone. It was Dr. John letting me know that he'd be late and that I needed to handle things on my own for the day. As I walked back to the morgue, an uneasy feeling crept over me. The thought of being alone with that body sent shivers down my spine, but I couldn't let fear get the best of me. I took a deep breath and stepped back into the room. The young woman's body was still there, covered with the same white sheet, but something felt off. I couldn't pinpoint what it was, but the silence was unnerving. I turned away to put on my sterilized gloves, and when I looked back, the sheet was on the floor. I froze. The body was still on the stretcher, but now completely uncovered. My mind raced to find a logical explanation, but I couldn't think of one. Summoning every ounce of courage, I approached the body and began my work. I had to take her fingerprints and documents her injuries. She had deep cuts on her wrist, likely the cause of death. But then I noticed something strange. When I first saw her eyes were blue. Now they were pitch black. I blinked, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. The final task was to place her body under the scanning machine for a full examination. I positioned the stretcher and turned to operate the computer. When I glanced back at the body, I froze in terror. She was no longer lying flat. Her head was turned toward me, her eyes seemingly staring right into mine. One of her arms was hanging off the stretcher as if she was about to grab me. My blood ran cold. I backed away slowly, unable to take my eyes off her. The logical part of my brain screamed that this was impossible. She was dead. But my instincts told me to run, and that's exactly what I did. I bolted out of the morgue, my heart pounding. I stopped at the reception desk to catch my breath, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. Just then, the janitor walked by and asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was fine, but I wasn't. I asked him to accompany me back to the morgue under the pretense of needing help with cleaning. When we returned, the body was back to its original position, lying flat on the stretcher as if nothing had happened. With the janitor there, I quickly finished my work locked the body in its chamber, and left the morgue as fast as I could. That day, I realized the morgue is not just a place for the dead. Sometimes it feels like the dead are watching you.